actually, I'm going to stand up so that, okay, let's go. You all know this, but for those who are not involved in water every day, water is part of everything we are, interconnected to everything we do. And I have been so blessed to have water as my career from the time that Rebecca and I were both very young women. So, moving on, second slide. Not so long ago. Thank you, Tom. Next slide. This is a good friend here. But sometimes we tend to ignore. We get so busy that we ignore what's going on around us. We get about our day. We forget, we've got an extra water bottle. We don't want to recycle it. We've got a little trash. It's in our car. We throw it into the river. And we forget in the hustle and bustle of our everyday lives that it's just, this is part of our modern society. And we forget to take good care of our water. Next slide. So these are the various uses for clean water: municipal water supply, recreation, transportation, economic development, flood control, hydropower, health and safety, agricultural purposes, and livestock watering, protection of endangered species, and of course the spiritual and cultural aspects of the Clean Water cannot be overlooked. Next slide. 40 years ago today, the Clean Water became the law of the land, and as Rebecca said, it was over a presidential veto. So while you had support in the Congress, almost unanimous support, you had a White House, if you remember, Nixon created EPA, and then vetoed the Clean Water Act, and it tended to be over jurisdiction of whether it's a federal interest or a state interest, and of course who was going to pay for it. Let's go ahead, next slide. More than $200 billion has been invested in cleaning up our nation's waters in the last 40 years. And that's only what we can track. That doesn't track every dollar of Tom's budget or of what Crystal and Dan are doing for the city. It doesn't track what's going on at the County of Albemarle. So these are the best numbers we have, and you can assume that it's significantly more than that over the last 40 years. Next slide. I love this one. Several generations of little people and big people have been involved in clean water, and I know every time we have a cleanup here at the Rivanna River, my little grandchildren all get dragged out, and one of my great stories is we were doing a cleanup at Riverview Park, and someone had left a battery in the river. And my 10-year-old grandson, Seth, threw his arms in the air and he said, "Grandma, what are these people thinking?" And I knew right then I'd done my job. Next slide. We can just take this on. Rebecca's already talked about these, but it's in the handout. The next slide, Ross, the next one, please. Okay, so as Rebecca indicated, there were hints and problems nationwide that our water quality was being degraded. And here we are right on the shores of the Rivanna, one of the very first rivers to have legislation. And we used it for navigation, but we also used it as a toilet. We used it as a trash bin. And we also were using lots and lots of pesticides. And so Rachel Carson wrote her sort of unbelievable book, The Silent Spring, and if you haven't read it, I urge you to do that. She was a single woman. She was just an incredible student of agriculture and pesticides and the land, and she wrote down what has become sort of the environmental Bible for lots of us, but she got attention, and this was the first time that these kinds of discussions were taking place on Capitol Hill. Next slide. So the outcry sort of started building. We had these issues that Rebecca talked about. We had Rachel Carson's book. Then we had sort of this uprising. Some of us were involved in that, some of us weren't. In the 70s of citizens saying, look, we just can't keep doing this. We can't keep fouling our waters and our land. And so Earth Day took place in April of 1970. And at the same time, there were two great guys who I shouldn't call them guys, two great statesmen that I had the honor and privilege to know, Ed Muskie, who was the Democrat from Maine, and Howard Baker, the Republican of Tennessee, who were the House and Senate leaders, majority and minority leaders, who started having their staff go out and working with the different states to pick the brightest and the best of the state programs with the clear intention of creating a national statute. So the best and the best and the brightest were being pulled together, and there were actually 8 years of hearings that Mr. Muskie and Mr. Baker pulled together. And we'll just move along. You can read those. Ross, next one. Next one, please. Okay, so on December 2nd, 1970, EPA was created, and Rebecca says she was one of the lowly bureaucrats, but I've known Rebecca a long time, and she would never be a lowly anything, because she's been so knowledgeable and such a leader of our field from the very beginning. And then on October 18th, 1972, the Clean Water Act was passed. I would like to say that I was involved in that. I was not. I did not join EPA until 1973. But I was in the water division where implementation of these programs became a big priority. As you can imagine, the regulations were being written. Ross? The objective, restore and maintain the chemical, physical, biological integrity of our nation's waters. Ross, next one. Next one, please. These were two, this shows you Mr. Muskie and Mr. Baker and their optimism about what we could do and what we could create. As you can well imagine, 1973, fishable, swimmable, we're still working on it. Zero discharge, not in my lifetime, but we'll keep working on it. And one of the reasons we haven't met these goals, to be honest, is, our population grows, the complexity of solving environmental problems. It's like the onion, as they say. You solve one problem, you peel it back, there's more problems to be dealt with. And it also, in a way, shows some of the simplistic thinking of that if you throw enough money at it, maybe we can solve these problems in a short time frame. On the other hand, we knew they were stretch goals at the time. Point source, non-point source in the statute, marine ecology, oceans and estuaries and wetlands, which don't get a lot of attention in our field, but are a big deal, of course, with coastal states. Toxic controls and groundwater protection. We don't think a lot about groundwater being part of the Clean Water Act, but it is. Ross? Okay, so next one, point source, non-point. Good, next one. Okay, and we have a number of tools. We have water quality criteria. We have waste load allocations, which are critical to the development of total maximum daily loads, and load allocations. Next, please. Permitting through the MPDES program, which I think is here, the VPDES program, correct? That's what we call it here. Effluent guidelines for industrial discharges, TMDLs, best available technologies. So Rebecca mentioned we had the biological approaches and then sort of pushing technology to say, if you can get it to a different level and you have the technology to do it, you're required to get there, which was a big debate there. And then we also had the assessment of water basins, watershed basins. And we tend to think all of a sudden that TMDLs, we keep hearing watersheds, they're our new big deal. Well, they're not. They were in the 72 statute. They've been around a long time. We've been trying to think on a regional basis, but it's not so easy because we all get into our own places and we're doing our jobs, and taking our time from doing our jobs to sitting down with our colleagues who might live in a different community is not so easy. So we've been working on this one for a long time, and give credit to all those in the room that have been doing it. This is just an assessment. We have 98% of the rivers. This is a very high standard. 98% of the rivers in the state of Virginia have been assessed, but with that said, we're still running about 50% that aren't meeting water quality standards. And so people can say, well, hundreds of billions of dollars have been spent, why aren't we meeting standards? Again, the complexity, increase in population, and so on. Next one, please. Okay, so most of you know this, but the river was named for Queen Anne. And it flows. I live in Greene County, so we have the little trickle that is the North Fork, and the South Fork comes through Albemarle County. It joins together to become the Rivanna. Then it meets with the James River at Columbia. It goes down through Richmond, all the way to the Chesapeake Bay. So when I'm talking to kids particularly, I say, well, you know, everything we do to defoul and defame our water, we're polluting our neighbors downstream. So everything you dump in the river goes not only down the Rivanna, but into the James and ultimately in the bay. So you're affecting the food that you eat, not only at home, but across the board. Oh, well, that's interesting how that got there. I guess it just wanted to move. That's one of the pictures from RCS that I love. And it's 42.1 miles. The next one, please. I keep getting asked that, and I never remember that it's 42.1. It's 766 square miles, and more than 100,000 people live in this area. Approximately 65% is forested, which is a good thing for us. It's also a good thing because we don't have a lot of industry. So unlike, for example, I did the Hudson River sojourn a few years ago, and you know, you want to talk about pollution and toxic chemicals and whatnot. We don't really have that to deal with here, but it's still, you know, a big deal. But we're very fortunate to have a lot of our waterway forested, and 70% of the Rivanna. Even so, okay, so we don't have as much industry, wow, but almost 70% does not meet for aquatic life. And one of the reasons, and we've got experts in the room that can tell us, but a lot of that is because we have so much erosion and sedimentation in our community, and this is a Streamwatch number. And, but of that, only 5 to 10% are severely degraded. So they may be just a little bit over the threshold, but still, they're over the threshold. Next one. Pathogens, E. coli, bacteria, and I just saw Angus come into the room, who's leading our bacteria monitoring program. Thank you for being here. E. coli pathogens, bacteria are a big issue that we deal with in this community. We have a lot of farms. They may not be huge farms, but we have a lot of farms. And of course, the erosion and sedimentation is really the thing that we spend so much time on, especially since the folks at Rivanna Water and Sewer do such a good job of cleaning up our wastewater, our waste. Okay, we've been working throughout the region, and there are a number of groups. In fact, when I moved here in 2006, I was amazed at how many environmental related groups there are. Sometimes it's not clear who's on first and who's doing what. But that's a wonderful challenge to have, that we have so many groups and so many people in this community that care about their environment. And so we've been working as a group within our organization. We're watershed-wide. There's Streamwatch, there's Rivanna River Basin Commission, Southern Environmental Law Center, PEC, Nature Conservancy, on and on. Why would that be? Well, because this is a very cool place to live, and lots of people want to live here and come here. So to address the problems that we have, there was, help me out here, Rick, when was the first suit, environmental? Well, I'll go back. There was a decision, and I'm kind of embarrassed to say I was actually there. There was a decision between the states and EPA soon after the Clean Water Act was passed that total maximum daily loads, and even Ed Muskie and Howard Baker kind of put that in as a, yeah, maybe in our lives, you know, but because it was going to be so difficult. And there were so many other challenges, building the wastewater treatment facilities, doing the assessments, doing the planning, trying to figure out how it all was going to work, developing water quality standards. So there was kind of this tacit agreement with Bill Ruckelshaus and what was called the Committee of 10, which were 10 state directors that came in to meet with him. And they didn't just say we're going to not pay attention to TMDLs, but it was kind of like, we'll get to it. We will, but it's not our highest priorities. Well, there were some environmental groups that decided that the time had come when TMDLs needed to get from the back burner to the front burner, and Rick brought a number of those suits on behalf of this particular watershed, and a colleague, Nina Bell, out in Oregon, brought a number of them. In fact, I think Nina brought the first suit, if I recall, and basically said, EPA, you're not implementing the Clean Water Act. We don't like it, and you better fix it. Well, okay, that's great, but they didn't bring suits against the states because it was against EPA because they failed to successfully implement this provision of the law. At least that's what it contended. Well, what came out after that was just this huge number of suits and consent decrees and TMDLs being done all over the place, some of them of questionable quality, but TMDLs got off the back burner and got onto the front burner. So this is not a new issue, but it got really high priority in our community because, let's move on, Ross. Okay, so we talked earlier about waste load allocations and load allocations and the margin of safety. And that's what you need to look at when you're doing a TMDL. Ross? And we have to do good TMDLs, credible water quality standards, scientifically based data, and comprehensive water monitoring, of which, fortunately, we have a fair amount of that in our community. Okay, so why now? Why do you keep reading about TMDLs, our pollution diet? Because there was an executive order in 2009 by President Obama that the Chesapeake Bay needed to be cleaned up, and this was going to force sort of all of us to work together and to work independently to put caps on nitrogen and phosphorus in the 6 Bay states, and the states were required to put caps on point and non-point sources. Next one, we're going to speed it up. In our community, right at this point, we're doing TMDLs, and some have implementation plans for Moores Creek, Lodge Creek, Shanks Branch, and Meadow Creek. If you're interested, there's lots of information available on these processes. And I love this little girl who plays in that. This reminds me of my grandkids. 1987, and Rebecca reminded me that stormwater was actually addressed in the original statute. But I'm going to tell our little funny story. The states developed a draft stormwater amendment, and we put it forward, and the House and Senate sort of adopted. We got sponsors, which you have to do, and they were kind enough to put our language into their bills. While Rebecca and I were in the conference committee, she representing EPA, and I was representing the state environmental agencies. And they couldn't come to closure on what they wanted the stormwater language to say. So, was it Mr. Chafee or Mr. Rowe, or both of them, Senator Chafee, I think, said, Rebecca, Robbi, go away, figure this out, because if EPA and the states can agree, then we probably got something. So she called her staff, I called some of mine, we worked all night long in my office, and we took them a new amendment the next morning. And to our shock, when we walked in, the conference committee was adjourned. Just adjourned. And we were so excited. We worked all night long. We had this provision. We came to find out that Mr. Chafee's daughter was getting married, and he had to go to her rehearsal dinner. And so it was done, because they figured, and I credit Rebecca and her wonderful EPA staff, that they believed enough in us to say, if you came with this, we agree. Now, the staff, I would say, did a little massaging, the congressional staff, perhaps after conference committee was completed. But it was one of those real exciting times in your life. And now that I'm dealing with it on the other end, holy cow, if we knew then what we knew now. Next one. So, stormwater for industrial facilities, construction, and municipal wastewater, or municipal sites. And that was pretty loosely, the regulations were really debated at that point. And now, of course, we have MS4s, of which the city of Charlottesville, the county of Auburn Rose MS4, and I believe also the university is a MS4. So we have our 3 major entities in this community developing their stormwater rules and regulations and programs. And we can move to the next one, Ross. The next one, please. This one, I think, is very interesting. I serve with a number of my colleagues on, it's got a longer name, but it's basically the Stormwater Utilities Committee. And at least for Charlottesville, they estimate that to address the problems here in our community, it's going to take about $10 million, maybe more, right, Dan? And so how do you deal with that? We don't have $10 million around. So next one. So next one, they're thinking about doing a stormwater utility. You're going to hear lots more about this. But please, please give this very serious consideration, because we have to find a way to solve our stormwater problems. It's the biggest issue, one of the biggest issues we face in our community, and we have to provide the staffs with enough money to do the job that they have to do. And the only way to do that, at least the best way, in my judgment, is a stormwater utility. So let's go back. As Rebecca said, we need to look at the land-water interface, point, non-point pollution, and something we didn't talk about, water quality and water quantity integration for surface and groundwaters next, and we'll finish up. And this continual patchwork, this liaison that we have together, working together from all of our different interests, working together with our governmental entities, it's really the only way we're going to be able to move forward. And then money. We've got to figure out a way. We're not getting $5 billion a year from the Congress. We're having to find our own sources of money. And so we need to be very creative, because clean water simply will not allow us to take a rest. So we have to find the money. And the last one is what I tell kids all the time. It's not just up to government. It's up to each one of us. It's not just you, it's not just me. We all have to work together for cleaner water, and that's the only way that we're going to accomplish our clean water goals. Thank you. Good looking man to finish up the, he's smart too.
How much time do we have? Enough time?
Yeah, we have enough time. And there are no binders.
Not even back in the office. So, good afternoon, everybody.